Thank you, Lord, for allowing us. And thank you for Renee and Brother Larry. We pray that the listeners will hear more than they want to hear, and that they'll contribute, and that will give them information that will allow them to continue to think that Boston is the best city, and Boston Praise Radio and Television is the best radio and television station on this side of the Mississippi. Bless us this morning. For Christ's sake, amen, amen.
Amen. Thank you for that, sir. So, we've known each other for quite a while. So, Reverend Culpepper, I'm here definitely sitting with a friend. First question I have to ask, you've retired from doing work for the federal government, right? You worked for HUD for a number of years, running a church here in the city on District 7. Why come out of retirement, people would ask, and take on such position when, most people feel like City Hall is so dysfunctional at this point in time?
Right. And so here's what's interesting about leaving the federal government. I left the federal government to run for that state senate seat.
Right.
That's exactly why I left the federal government and lost that Senate race, but kept doing the work that I was doing. I will always keep doing the work in the city. But when you leave one position, I'm convinced that you never retire. If you're someone that does the work, you're always going to be doing the work. If you're a leader, it's hard. How do you not lead? How do you stop leading? How do you go sit down? And so if you're a leader, that's what you do. You lead.
Right.
And for this position, for this city council race, let me tell you, after I ran that Senate race, I said I would never run for another seat. And I hadn't planned to run again.
Mm-hmm.
Started getting calls from folks saying, look, you need to run for this district council seat. And I would say to them, nope, I'm not running anymore. The Senate seat, I lost, that was it. And I kept getting calls from folks saying, you need to run for the Senate seat. In fact, I got one call, I'm not going to name who it was, but he said, this is your seat, this is your district. You were born in this district, raised in this district. Granddaddy built this church in this district. You live in this district. You fought for peace in this district and for what was right in this district. This is your district. I said, no, I'm not running. After so many calls, I said, let me tell you what I'll do. I'm going to Los Angeles for a week, and I'm going to pray and meditate. And I'm going to see what the Lord's will is for my life. So I went to Los Angeles, prayed and meditated for a week, heard from the Lord, talked to the Lord. And what I heard was, do it. Do it. Do it. I didn't hear anything. This is not your time. This is not something you should do. This is the will of the Lord. Do it. So when I came home excited.
Yeah.
That 5-hour flight was the longest flight from Los Angeles that I had, because I wanted to get back to tell folks that I heard from the Lord, and the Lord said, do it. And when you hear from the Lord and the Lord says, do it, and if it's according to the Lord's will, you can't go wrong.
No, I totally agree with you in that aspect. When I served as president of Mamler, you and I've had many conversations. So when you're saying how that resonates with me, because people had approached me about running, I'm like, I don't want to do that, right? And then you start wrestling with it, and like, if not me, then who, right? And we know the problems that are out there that need to be addressed, and we definitely need people who have experience in dealing with those issues. One of the things that I've been speaking to a lot of people in District 7, also around the city, is that, the last 2 out of the last 3 District 7 councilors have been marred with scandal and have been in court. So District 7, people feel it hasn't had a stability for quite some time, and people are looking for that. But also to that point, I was looking at the numbers, and a little over 8,000 people turned out to vote. You had a little over 1,000, and your competitor had a little over 1,000, and it was scattered around. Even if you're elected, it doesn't send the right message to the mayor, to the other councilors, that you have a body of people in your district that are supportive of you being there. How do we get that turned around?
So here's what's interesting. as you dig a little deeper into the number, and you look at where my numbers came from, Roxbury came out for me. Roxbury put me in the finals. I didn't get a lot of votes from Ward 4. I didn't get a lot of votes from the Fenway, but it was Roxbury. I won every precinct in Ward 12 except one, and I only lost that one precinct by a couple of votes. So if you look at Ward 12, Ward 12 is where I've done my work all these years, where we fought, especially in the middle of the gang violence, the work that we did in the street. Ward 12 came out big time for me. And it's clear, if you look at the other candidates and the votes from Ward 12, you'll see that I got twice as many votes from Ward 12 as anyone else. So look, they'll see that my base is in Roxbury. And let me just say this. I just want to thank all the folks from Roxbury and the other wards that voted for me, that made sure I got to the final. We did the recount. We gained votes in the recount. And so when you look at my campaign, Larry, it's interesting. It's not a campaign of all these political folks, right? It's friends, family, neighbors, acquaintances, folks that have for years worked with me in the trenches. And so we're not political people. I'm not a politician. We're not political people, but we're people that want to do right in the community, bring resources to the community. You know, my background is in housing. I was at HUD for 27 years as regional counsel. We focused on neighborhood stability, and at the time, we didn't call it neighborhood stability, but when we gave Academy Homes to the Tenant Association, they now own it. When we transferred Campfield Estates in the South End to the Tenant Association, all the tenants along Seaver Street, those apartments owned by the Tenant Association, it's neighborhood stabilization.
So let's dive into what your housing, because I think that's very important, right? We're seeing what people would consider gentrification, right, in those neighborhoods, right? Where in Boston, the average cost of a home is $1 million, and I think that's being generous. I think it's a little bit more than that, right? That neighborhood you're looking to represent is changing and changing dramatically, right?
Absolutely.
It's looking more like that Fenway, those areas you described that you didn't get votes for. That population is now moving in. What, if anything, as a member of the city council, would you be doing to help stabilize, to keep those folks in there? Because even the ones that are there, Reverend, their taxes have gone up considerably, where their taxes are now more than their mortgages for people who've been there. They may still have paid off their home, but you never own it, and now they can't pay this increase in the taxes. And it looks like with the city falling short on their budget for next year, the only way they generate any income is through taxes. So one, how do we stabilize people being able to stay in their homes, not just the owners, but people who were renting in our community that are being displaced?
Great question, Larry. And here's what's interesting. You used the right word, stabilization. And I have what I've been calling, and you know, I came up with this plan based on my experience in housing. I was chief of staff for a member of Congress. She was chair, Congresswoman Collins was chair of the subcommittee on housing. We did a lot of housing, especially she was focused on empowerment zones. We'll talk about that in a little while, but let's talk about housing for a second, because everyone's complaining about gentrification. And I put together what I call a gentrification neutralization plan. I mean, I know folks are saying, well, what's that? Gentrification neutralization. And that means that we want to neutralize gentrification. We'll never get rid of it, right? But we can neutralize it. And you neutralize it with existing housing resources. We don't need a big budget for any new housing program. I know the city is working on something. They're having a hearing today. But when I look at gentrification, just neutralizing gentrification, we can do that with existing resources. And let me tell you, there are 4 elements to my plan. Number 1, Section 8 housing, right? Someone with a portable Section 8, that means they can move to different cities. And we have seen folks moving from Boston to Brockton and Taunton in large numbers because they couldn't find an apartment here. Well, people think Well, they just can't find an apartment. They're not available. Boston Foundation and Suffolk University Law School, they did that study. And what they found in that study that many of the Section 8 tenants that are trying to rent, who are black and brown, are being discriminated against. So they end up going to Brockton. Well, I say if you're going to go to Brockton, I would prefer that they stayed here. They can buy a single family home with that Section 8. You really have to tell folks, look, you don't have to rent with that. Banks love Section 8 because they're going to get paid every month. That Section 8 will pay for those mortgages. So that's one way of home ownership to begin to neutralize gentrification.
So let me
Another
say,
way-
so folks are understanding, because I think this is the first time I'm ever hearing that
Yeah.
you can use Section 8
Absolutely.
for a
Absolutely.
mortgage. That's
Absolutely.
That's in the rules. See, I was not aware of that.
Absolutely. And that's my point. Because of my experience and knowledge with housing and looking at what we did at housing, 27 years of it, time on Capitol Hill, I kind of know housing in and out. We were strongly encouraging the Boston Housing Authority while I was at HUD to really ramp up the Section 8 homeownership program. In New Hampshire, they were buying homes with Section 8 certificates. We saw, I mean, I would go up there to these closings and just watch the closing, but the Housing Finance Agency in New Hampshire was really educating folks and encouraging them and supporting them to buy the homes. Well, if you go on the Boston Housing Authority's website now, you'll see the Kinsey Bach, and it was a big thing that I talked about when I ran for the Senate, Section 8 home ownership. There was a lot of debate about it, but you'll see that the Boston Housing Authority now has a Section 8 home ownership program on their website. There's certain requirements, like you gotta have a 650 credit score, you gotta have $4,000 in the bank, but they also have programs where Section 8 prospective homeowners can get help with down payment and deposits. And so the city is moving in the right direction in that way. But I also think there's the home ownership issue for renters in terms of folks who are living in public housing. So we know that public housing is transitioning, and I'm really concerned about the transition that I see public housing taking to market rate units. The McCormick Housing Development, for example, in South Boston, they announced a couple of months ago that they're redoing it, that the 1,200 project-based Section 8 units will stay, but they're adding 1,000 market rate units. So you're going to have 1,000 market rate units with 1,200 Section 8 units. The problem that I have, and we had when I was at HUD, we fought over this. It's a program they call RAD, Winter Acquisition Demonstration. It was supposed to be a pilot, but when you see it now, private owners are now taking over public housing. So the McCormick Housing Project in South Boston, it's not owned by the Boston Housing Authority. Wynn Development, Wynn Management now owns that major development that they're going to build.
Well, see, you also are an attorney
Yes.
by trade. So the knowledge and hearing you, but a lot of folks aren't as versed in finding this information and then even understanding it, right? I mean, you're explaining it quite well. That, like I said, and it's opening my eyes to things that now I can pass along to other folks. But I want to stay on that housing for a second also, because I think sometimes the elephant in the room that people don't pay as much attention to is the expansion of the colleges and universities, right? And payment in lieu of taxes, right? That they're not paying their fair share, but they're expanding their footprint. But none of that housing that they're creating for the colleges is benefiting the local residents, right? If Northeastern and BU and Harvard build a dorm, that's for their students, for them to make money. And yet they're not paying an equal amount of taxes. As a council member, because I haven't heard anyone address that, because I think that would be a vital resource to helping fund housing for some of the folks in the city, that stabilization that we're just talking about.
So here's what's interesting. You're talking about the pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes,
yes.
right? As a city councilor, the first thing I would do is say to Northeastern, you need to pay what you're committed to pay, right? Northeastern said this is what they would pay. but they're not even paying what they are committed to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you've got to say to them, look, this is just the first step, right? The second thing, and it's really interesting when you look at Northeastern, I hate to pivot off to Madison Park and education,
Mm-hmm.
but when you look at what's happening at Northeastern and you look at what's happening in Madison Park, you saw that report that just came out in the Globe yesterday that said the schools in the inner city are schools where black and brown kids are getting the less amount of money to improve the school capital funding than the schools out in the suburbs that don't even need it.
Right.
So number one, you need a council person that's going to call, speak truth to power about what's happening with the state money that should be going, because the Boston, one of the issues that they've been talking about regarding Madison Park and rebuilding Madison Park is that we're not getting enough money from the state to supplement. Well, the reason why we aren't is because the money is going to schools in the suburbs that don't even need it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you need a council that's going to not just come up with programs from existing resources, but really hold folks, bring them to the carpet, bring them to the table, sit down with them. And I don't want to use the word demand, right?
No,
But I'm going to use the word demand
yeah.
because
Listen, when I get my tax bill, it's a demand. It's not an if you feel like it. Right?
But I think the state needs to fess up. They need to look at the years. And I'm not, we keep going into different areas. I don't want to go into reparations. But when you look at what the state has been paying the schools in the suburbs that didn't even need the money versus what we needed, we should look back over the years, and they need to really come to the table, give the Boston public school system what they need to rebuild. I'm not talking about just rehab in Madison Park. That's just putting a Band-Aid on the wound. Because when you look at Northeastern, they're not rehabbing any dorms over there. They're building brand new, contemporary of the state dorms and residences for those students there.
What?
The school, when you look at Northeastern, Larry. Years ago, we know Northeastern was a big-time co-op school.
Yes.
In fact, that's what made Northeastern
my alma
what it is.
mater.
You got a co-op, right?
Right.
Everybody got a co-op.
Right.
They came from across the world to Northeastern because they were guaranteed that co-op. That co-op turned into full-time jobs
Yes.
for many of those students that took those co-ops.
Yeah.
The students in Madison Park are having challenges just getting a co-op.
Right. 6 months. You listen to People Power, Priscilla. 617-282-0685. 617-282-0685 is the number. That's a good way. I want to segue into that because we really touched on the housing, and I think you've identified some areas where we could do better and where the city council should be doing better. But also, we know that some of this needs help from the state. But I think, tying that into the housing, there are also other avenues where these colleges could be helping. The education here in the city of Boston
Absolutely.
is abysmal,
Absolutely.
right? If they're not helping on the tax base, right, they could at least be helping to educate our children, right? Because the recent report that came out, Reverend Culpepper, it's not favorable that our kids are learning in math and science and the basics, right? We're graduating kids with diplomas that can't even read them, right? Our exams to schools should be the norm, not the exception, right? And so the budget for the city of Boston, the largest budget money spent out is $1.4 billion on education, with schools that are closing and not improving, right? What would be your working with the city council and moving that forward, because we're regressing quite a bit on the education piece with our kids, and we're shuttering schools?
A couple of things. First, I think we need an elected Boston School Committee.
The citizens voted for that.
If you remember when we were youngsters, right? We had John O'Brien, we had Gene McGuire,
Yeah.
we had school committee members from the district at the table fighting for us, taking our message to the school committee. We don't have that now. We need that. The other thing is, when you look at coming back to Northeastern, and I'm not really picking on Northeastern, but I am, because Northeastern is right across the street from Madison Park. There ought to be a program between Madison Park and Northeastern. I say, you want to think about reparations, where the students from Madison Park that get accepted to Northeastern, they should be able to go tuition free.
Right, but to that point, Madison Park has a vocational school that has pretty much been dormant, right? T. Michael Thomas, who's been a frequent caller on not just this broadcast, but others, the People's Academy, training. We're seeing a vocation around the country being more embraced because not everyone can afford to or wants to go to college, right? What would you do to help to increase the vocational aspect of kids who just aren't college bound?
I think, well, look, I think vocational schools are important. We've always had them. If you remember, we had the trade school. That was right over by where Wentworth was, trade school. English was over
OIC,
at Avenue.
Boston Business School. We had alternatives.
That's right. And so for Madison Park, again, I come back to let's demolish Madison Park. Let's build Madison Park, a spanking new state-of-the-art school and it, you can focus on technical and the trades. I think that's important. But you got the John O'Brien is right over there also. You got to take care of that landscape. And if you look at Madison Park, if you look at where they are, the kind of state-of-the-art school you could have would be amazing. That's what we want to do for Madison Park. Just like Northeastern continues to build, we need to do the same thing for our young folks so that they feel as though their environment is one that is not only being inclusive, but it's also reinforcing the fact that education is the key.
Well, I think you have a close-up look at that, right? If you it's like a tale of two cities, right?
That's right.
When you have the O'Brien, the wall abuts Madison Park, and I say to most people, I said I can tell which students, because I worked in the schools for the police department my last 15 years. I can tell which are O'Brien students and which are Madison Park students, and I shouldn't be able to identify the students, but it is so obvious. You have to be realistic that. Right next door is an exam school where our kids are on a path to success. And next door, we're responding to multiple fire alarms, literally and figuratively. Inside that building, there's very little, if any, learning going on. And then we have a dormant vocational component of that where some of these kids could still at least be learning a trade. And we're not experiencing that here in the city of Boston. And we're, because I'm going to pivot a little bit here because we're going to put hundreds of millions of dollars into White Stadium, which people are saying that they don't want in there for a soccer stadium. I want to get your opinion on that, your take on that. But we're not spending money on new schools. I know today they're announcing they just opened up another school in Rosendale, right? That's probably the first. But I don't think there's been a new high school built here in the city of Boston since Madison Park.
I was about to talk about Charles Yancey. And if you remember Charles Yancey called for a new high school in Mattapan. Year after year after year, he fought for a new high school in Mattapan. I never understood why he couldn't get a new high school in Mattapan. They closed Hyde Park. When I went to visit Hyde Park before they closed, the sad thing about it was those students were in classrooms where they had trash cans under the ceiling because the ceilings were leaking. And I said to myself, this makes no sense, especially when the Boston Public School budget is 35% of the city's budget.
The largest appropriation.
These kids are going to school and the ceilings are leaking. It just doesn't make sense. I think we need to really look at what's happening with the Boston Public Schools. I think we need to really reassess relationships, especially with Northeastern. I want to sit down as city council with the Northeastern president and give them a proposal of what we think Northeastern can do, not just with the pilot program, not just with payment in lieu of taxes, but in terms of education. If Northeastern is the education hub over on Huntington Ave, right across the street, they should have the same commitment to the students in Madison Park to help educate them.
Well, to that point, they have a program over there, right? After the Charles Stewart, folks aren't aware, where Charles Stewart killed his wife and unborn child and blamed it on a black man, and they just demoralized the Mission Hill housing development, just rousting black people because of an accusation. That they put up together a program, and it was a scholarship for students who lived in that area.
In the area.
The last person to receive one of those scholarships, you know who that was? Rachel Rollins. former DA, was the last one to receive a scholarship from Northeastern to attend from that school.
And that's why I say we put together a proposal, because it makes no sense. You talk about the tale of two cities. You walk across the street, Tremont Street, Columbus Avenue to Northeastern, you think you're in a whole different world.
Right, you are.
You come back home. Well, you're right, because they even have a sign over there that, you know what that sign says?
No, I don't.
Northeastern City.
Northeastern City.
They even have a sign there. How ridiculous in the face of Madison Park and what's going on with Madison Park. So I think the first thing we need to do, get the funding to build a new Madison Park. I also think we need to build this relationship with Northeastern. That program that they have for the young folks to come on to Mission Hill, it's nice, it's cute, it's not what we need. We need Northeastern inside of Madison Park, and we need Madison Park inside of Northeastern University. Those young folks from Madison Park should be able to go to a pre-college program at Northeastern. They're starting those programs all over the country where high school students are now taking college courses. It's not an AP class. They're actually getting credit for college courses. I don't understand why we can't do the same for the students in Madison Park and the other students in the city of Boston. They need a first-class education. And you know, can you imagine what those students are thinking? They're going to Madison Park. They're looking right across the street at the students in Northeastern, what the students in Northeastern are getting versus what they're getting. They have to feel like they're secondary.
No, it's out of reach, and it's a stone's throw away.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. But I think you got to have the political will to really push it and fight for it. And you know, we know how to act up, right? We can act up, right, Larry? We can take to the street. But we know that it's important that Northeastern and Roxbury Community College is right there.
Well, I'm glad
right?
you mentioned that. Again, you're listening to People Power Priscilla. The calling number here, 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685. In studios, our guest, Minya Culpepper. He's a candidate for District 7 City Council. He's here answering questions for you. So if you have any questions or comments, give us a call here at Boston Praise Radio and TV. You know, Reverend, you touched on a lot of very good points there, and you've highlighted things that people say they want, they need here in the city of Boston. But to your point with the education, and I want to pivot for a second, you're right, because RCC, most people don't understand, they have a program there, right? Because I always try to direct our kids for success, not failure.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the kids, I said, look, you know, you're not ready for a 4-year college, and it's not ready for you. But if you go over to RCC and you keep your grades up, you can transfer to another school with a bigger name and get your bachelor's degree from there, even though you have your associates from RCC. But at least it's more palatable, because I had a young man that I work with, and glad to say that he went there, and because he got the support from myself and others, he finished up, went over to UMass, got his bachelor's degree, and now has his master's degree, and is now employed with the city of Boston as a police officer. He's a detective now, right? So I know it can work, but we have to invest in it. But the other thing I want to say is that most people see the city council as a rubber stamp, most of them there for the mayor, right? People are looking for independence because the city council, in most people's opinion, has very little power to begin with, right? People feel like once they pass the budget, they can go on vacation, right? And now the mayor is, because Boston is a mayoral strong city. The last, before Mayor Wu took place, there was some modifications to the city council's power, but not enough that really makes a difference, because most places like Cambridge and other, the mayor doesn't have as much power. And I think, would you be in favor of more changes that empowers the council, which there are 13 members, I believe is the number, than one person that really dominates what happens here in the city of Boston?
Here's what's interesting, Larry. I'm convinced that an independent District 7 city councilor that is fighting for resources, and when you look at, I've looked at the resources that come to District 7 versus the resources that goes to other districts. And so you have to begin to fight to carve out resources for District 7.
But not to cut you off, but I'm gonna let you finish the thought. But does that go to the mayor? Also counts numbers, right? When I look at what's the number, do you know, of the eligible voters to vote in District 7? Do you know what that number is?
When you look at the registered voters, so let's say you have 70,000 voters, right?
Right.
You look at who voted, and going back to this election, you mentioned earlier that there were 8,000 voters in this election. That election was higher than the last final election 2 years ago. That election for the primary was higher than the last mayoral election turnout in District 7.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing in District 7 is when you put somebody up to run that folks want to vote for, because people say, oh, they don't vote, they don't vote. Well, if you put somebody up for them to vote for, folks will come out and vote because we saw it in this last election.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about it is I've always been independent. I've always called for what was fair and what was right, not just for District 7, but across the city of Boston. I think you got to understand the budget process. I think you got to be part of the budget process.
Well,
as they begin to carve up the budget,
right.
and as they begin to look at where the needs are, especially for District 7, because District 7 has been excluded in a major way from the budget process and bringing resources to the district. My goal is to sit and look at that budget and to carve out from that budget what benefits, especially when it comes to businesses. So let's talk about the businesses just 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much time we
No,
have left.
we've got about 21.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. So, on Capitol Hill, I worked for a congresswoman who called herself the mother of empowerment zones.
Mm-hmm.
She was from Michigan. She's from Detroit. And if you look at what Congress did with empowerment zones, they actually created zones for businesses where the investments went directly to those businesses. If you look at Detroit today, look at downtown, look at how downtown Detroit has come back from years of blight and being ignored. It's now a downtown that you can walk through and shop different stuff. It's amazing because of the empowerment zone. I say from the city council, we can create an empowerment zone here in the empowerment zone.
But,
let me just finish. Create an empowerment zone that includes Nubian Square and Grove Hall. Look at those businesses that really need to have financial support. Invest in those businesses.
Right.
So 10 years from now, those businesses can be the booming businesses that they really ought to be, with basic investments in those businesses.
Right, but that's what I'm going to get to Nubian Square for a second, because you're forecasting my question. Is that, when we're talking about the business and the city councilors, see, sitting here talking to you, most people, like I said, don't know your background, don't know your experience, right? Most of the city councilors don't have the credentials that you have, right? And folks don't do their due diligence and their homework, right? Because you're articulating things here that make sense. And most people don't research. They don't know that most of them down there, like, not to disparage him, but, Santana, right, who was supposed to be in our bride, he was a landscaper. And I'm not saying that, but now he's there making decisions for at large for a citywide group of people, doesn't understand. So you're more likely to be leaning on the mayor or someone else's thoughts process to make your decisions because you don't know how to formulate one, or you're afraid to. We have to do better when we're vetting candidates for these offices rather than maybe a name recognition and things like that. So that's my comment, folks, because I feel like we're lacking in intellect. And this is not to disparage folks, but you cannot get a group of people there to deal with complex issues when they don't know the issues that they're dealing with. Nubian Square, I'm glad you touched on that, because you said, like I said, even if you invest the money, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. I went to Nubian Square when I was a police officer because it took me there for work. I was at the bowling building for work related. But it's not some place that I would feel comfortable bringing my family. And I grew up in Roxbury, and I should be able to, right? So we still see some investments going on there. Some things have improved, but like the Walgreens is closed, and they're closing more of their stores. And there's an elderly building right next door to the old Walgreens, which is now a sporting goods store. those seniors in that building need their medication. They also need to be able to walk outside and not see what I'm seeing on there. It looks like something made for HBO and the blight that is taking place down there. And that is would be your district.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
What, if any, plans? Because what we've done at Mass and Cass is we've just dispersed it around the city and mainly in communities of color.
And so that's what I'm talking about when you look at an empowerment zone and you look at a zone that has been created for the purpose of specific investments in that zone. I think Nubian Square, including Grove Hall in an empowerment zone, will allow a city councilor to look at the budget, to look at economic development in the city, to work with the economic developer, Sagun, to help bring specific targeted investments to those businesses that need a little financial help. Even if it's a small business that needs a major stove, or even if it's a small business that needs a major renovation, they want to enlarge their kitchen. The city council, I think, is a place where that should take place. I think as a city councilor, looking at that budget, and I've looked at that budget and I looked at the percentage of funds that go to different districts, I think we're on the losing end of it. I think it's critical that you look at the budget, because folks talk about, well, we just passed the budget. You do more than pass the budget. You help formulate a budget. The city council was given more powers in the budget. And so when you look at what already exists, I'm not even talking about any new powers. You have leverage to create opportunities in District 7. Yes, I think District 7, and the sad thing is when you stand in District 7, you look downtown, you see all those cranes downtown in the Seaport and over by the Expressway and the Prudential and all those cranes. Then you look at District 7, you don't see any cranes at all. You don't see any economic development in District 7. I want to bring economic development in a big way to District 7. We deserve it. We need it. We're crying out for it. Folks want to be involved economically.
Mm-hmm.
And
but also people want to be safe, right, in that space, right? And we're seeing a lot of things that are not safe in that district. So how do we attack that problem? I'm not talking about physically attack, but how do we, because look, if you're homeless, you're going to sleep wherever you can, right? And if you can't afford a home in Boston, let alone with a drug addiction, and then these kids are coming from our schools right around there into Nubian Square. It's like, you know, the central spot for people to move out, right? That's the hub to get people moving around the city is Nubian Square, the MBTA station there. But it you know, I've been down there and I've talked to the chief of the T, and they're doing the best they can. But it smells like a toilet down there.
here's what's interesting. The city council just voted on what they consider a recovery campus. They just voted on that last week. I've been calling for what we call a care campus in California, Skid Row. If you have been in Los Angeles Skid Row is tantamount to our Mass and Cass. What they did was they have what they call a care campus, where those folks that had, addiction is a disease, had issues, whether it was addiction, mental health, whatever it was, they now go to the care campus.
Right.
The city council called it a recovery campus because we need a place. It was at Long Island.
Yeah.
We know much of the problems came from Long Island when that bridge was no longer functional, and no one was paying attention to where folks were going.
So to that point, though, would you, because on that opioid, the state received a large chunk of money from these pharmaceuticals because a lot of us were paying attention. We knew this opioid, right? People were getting prescription med, and now would you as a counselor fight to get more of that funding to address,
Absolutely.
to work with what you're doing? That's what I'm saying is that
Absolutely.
the city council needs to be more than seen as just the passing a budget and then going home.
And I think they are. That's why I'm running for this office. I don't see myself as being a patsy going to sit at the city council and say, yeah, I'm at the city council. I'm going to the city council to fight for the residents in District 7, that District 7 gets their fair share across the board, whether it's housing, whether it's business, whether it's economic development, that District 7 gets their fair share. And you know, Larry, I've been fighting all of my life. Nothing, a fight is not new to me.
I've been in some of
but
those
you
fights
gotta
with you.
I know you
So, trust me, I know.
But I also know that you've got to be independent.
Yes.
You've got to be the voice for District 7. So when I come out to District 7 and I hear and meet, let me give you a good example. We've got that General Gordine park that we developed, that we fought for.
Down in
Do
encampment.
you know what it took to fight?
Right
Fighting
across
with
from
the
the police
city
station.
to get that done.
I know. Thank you, Haywood.
And I got a complaint
No.
just last week about the folks that are lit all day long. They're there, and the police station's right next door.
Right. Look, you
Now-
can look out the window.
Now that makes no sense.
But see, the police have been told to not engage, right? Look at what's just happened recently, Reverend, with the kids down there taking over streets, right? Because the police officers have been told you are not to engage with people in that behavior. Just let them go, and whatever happens, happens. And this is so now people take it a step further. That's the directive of the police department.
When we were young folks, the police officers weren't told not to engage.
Right.
They
We're
engaged.
in a whole new world.
And it makes no sense for the police department right next door to be able to look out at the window and to see them urinating outside or to using drugs right outside. And I just think that's unacceptable. And I think we have to bring in a new approach.
Yeah.
Because it just can't happen. We didn't fight to put that park there for folks to sleep there.
Right.
And urinate there and use drugs there.
Right.
We fought for folks to go to that park
And understand the history.
and that's absolutely right. And to respect
Right.
that park for what it is.
Right, for black
so-
soldiers. But also to that point, Rev, folks feel like, the mayor's race was conceded by Josh Kraft. The mayor is now unopposed. People feel that she was emboldened prior to that, even more emboldened now, in that she really doesn't have to listen to the city councilors because she feels she has been given a mandate from the voters, and not even a large percentage of the vote, because the turnout was abysmal, honestly, when you think about the number, over 420,000 eligible voters, that you have less than 100,000 people turn out. Some people's reasoning was we're waiting for the general election to vote for their candidate, right? And, well, your candidate may not be in the race now. How do you combat that? Because it just seems like, again, unless there's some rule changes that empowers the council, this mayor is going to be just full steam ahead with her program.
I think a couple of ways. I think, first of all, you need to be a skilled legislature. You need to know what you're doing. Day one, I go to City Hall with the experience of working on Capitol Hill, with the experience of watching how folks form coalitions. And I think that's critical for the city council. That look, each city councilor has certain pet projects that they want for their district. Well, we want certain pet projects for District 7 also. So if you want your pet project, you got to support my pet project. I think coalitions are critical in terms of bringing resources to this district so that, again, this district gets their fair share of investments from the city. I also think you need, and this is just Minyard Culpepper, you need someone that's going to fight for what is right, fight for what's right for this district. It may not be the right thing for every other district, but I think when you listen to the residents of this district, you listen to the issues that they raise, I think the role of a city councilor is to come to the district, to hear from the residents, take what the residents give you back to City Hall to fight for.
Speaking of back to City Hall, would you be willing to look and explore because Chuck Turner had it. I thought it was very effective. He had an office in the district.
Absolutely. We're going to have an office.
Okay.
You need an office in the
Yes,
district.
because the city
Gotta
hall
have
is not
an office
right.
in
It's
the
not
district.
easy to get to.
And I've said to folks that I would have an open door policy. You don't need to call and make an appointment. You don't need to go online to make an appointment. You can walk right in, because I think there are times when folks need to walk right into the office.
Mhm.
Your issue may not have time to wait for you to have an appointment or for you to walk right into the office. I also think you need a district office, because if you remember years ago when we had those little city halls all over the city,
Yeah, the
you
truck.
didn't have to go downtown.
Right.
All you had to do is go right to that little city hall. I think a district office is critical. I think you have to have a district office. Some folks can't make it downtown.
Right. So also I read recently, and we've got a couple of minutes, and I want to give you the end time to make your pitch to the residents in District 7 as to why they should elect you on November 4th. We had stools like the food stores that closed down there, and there was one in Nubian Square, one in at Park Street, and to the Daily Table, right? And now the city is talking about opening up their own grocery stores. We do need healthy food in our community, right? We've got more than enough. We suffer from the highest rate of asthma, high blood pressure, diabetes, right? Would you be in lockstep or willing to have the city's plan to open up a food store? They're talking about opening up grocery stores, city-owned grocery stores in the city.
Well, Larry, it's interesting, but this is old news.
Okay.
I've talked about that years ago, especially during COVID. During COVID, we started a food pantry at the church, because if you remember those long lines, folks didn't have food. Folks would stand in line for hours to get food for that night to put on the table, and sometimes they ran out of food. And did you see the disappointment on folks' faces? They were running out of food. We still give out up to 250 boxes of food every 2 weeks through the church.
Mm-hmm.
We have a line, folks come, get their box of food, and just keep on going.
And it's only getting worse.
It's only getting worse. And people think that it's getting better with the cost of inflation,
And the health
with
care
the
going.
cost of everything. Don't get started on it.
No,
Please
no.
don't get started on that,
No.
because I don't even want to look at my next health care bill at the increase that we're going to get, because these folks down in Washington can't seem to sit down and work out something that makes sense. It makes no sense for the government to. Why does the government have to shut down? It makes no sense. What about we the people? So let me just come back to the food stores.
Yeah.
So we still give out close to 250 boxes of food every 2 weeks. During COVID, we would give out 250 boxes Friday and Saturday. Larry, it's so bad now that we give out those 250 boxes within 2 hours.
No.
That food has gone so quick. And the sad thing is, we still have people that are coming later looking for food. So we go back into the church and we scrape up what we can. Well, not scrape up, but we always have extra food from other sources that we can give to them. But folks are hurting. And I think you need a city councilor that understands the hurt that folks are feeling, that will go down to help fight to alleviate. I believe the government's role is to help subsidize those that are struggling in a way that they don't make it on their own.
No, you're right. Listen, we've got about 2 minutes. I'm going to get you make your closing pitch for District 7 residents who are out there listening, and folks who, as to why on November 4th they should cast their deciding vote in the general election for Minion Culpepper for City Council for District 7.
Thank you, Larry. And one of the things that's interesting in this election, we've heard much discussion about food insecurities, pharmacy insecurities. We've heard much talk about safety and housing. And one of the things about Minyard Culpepper is Minyard Culpepper just doesn't talk about housing. Minyard Culpepper goes out and helps build housing. Minyard Culpepper just doesn't talk about neighbor security, neighborhood stabilization. But my role has been to stabilize neighborhoods. And I've done it with the experience and the knowledge from working on Capitol Hill and working at HUD for 27 years and understanding housing, I understand, and I have said over and over that I have a gentrification, and I hope folks can understand neutralization plan to neutralize gentrification. When it came to the pharmacy issue and Walgreens wanted to move out, Minyard Culpepper didn't just talk about Walgreens move out and criticize them. Minyard Culpepper went out and started that protest to fight Walgreens to stay here longer, and they did extend their time here. When it came to youth violence, and Larry, you know that all too well, I didn't just stand on the sidelines talking about youth violence. Larry Ellison and Minyard Culpepper were in the midst of the gang fight. They talk about peace now. This peace that they have now is what we were fighting for and what we brought. We don't get credit, but look, we know how peace came to the city of Boston. When you look at COVID and you look at vaccinations, and folks were afraid to take a shot, it was Minyard Culpepper that pulled together the ministers that got the first shot bring.
I hate to cut you off, but we've got to go. Minyard Culpepper, candidate for District 7 City Council.